All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Emily Finnegan here, the CivicSpark Water Project Associate, and we will be conducting your OnCorps webinar training today. I am here with Kristen Wraith, who is the CivicSpark Program Manager, and I'll let Kristen introduce herself. You all have mostly been in contact with me, but you also may be in contact with Kristen throughout the service year, so I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself. Kristen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Emily. Again, my name is Kristen Wraith, and I'm the Program Manager for CivicSpark. So I work on both the climate and water tracks of the program. This is my third service year with CivicSpark, so if you have any questions or anything, Emily and I can definitely tag team to answer those. And I'll probably be sending you some emails and other things throughout the year, but excited to be working with you all.
Great. And as Kristen is the OnCorps guru, I brought her in on this call to support us in this training. I just want to begin by sharing with you all, in terms of our login page, you can see our OnCorps reporting screen, or you should be able to. If you cannot, definitely chat us and let us know. But this is your main portal screen where you all will be logging in to approve fellow time cards, review any fellow reporting, and I have assigned each of you a username and password. So when you go into your OnCorps reporting screen here, and I will send all of these instructions in a follow-up email, you'll begin by selecting the service year. So we are in the 2016-17 service year. At that point, you'll go in to log in, and you'll see our CivicSpark Water Action Fellowship listed among other AmeriCorps programs. And OnCorps is a system that many AmeriCorps programs use for all of their program reporting. So you'll select the CivicSpark Water Action Fellowship in your role as the site supervisor. And at that point, you will be prompted for your username and password. So I have assigned each of you a username and password. Your username would be your first initial and your last name. So for example, if it were mine, it would be E. Finnegan. And then your password for everyone at this point is CivicSpark. And again, I will send detailed instructions via email after this webinar so that you will be able to follow these instructions. At this point, we are going to log in with Kristen's login as a director so that she can show you a little bit in more detail what the reporting will look like. And we'll have to use our current fellows reports, as we do not have any members fully enrolled in OnCorps yet. So I'll let Kristen take the mic here as we go through both program reporting and the breakdown of service hours.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. So as we're going through the webinar, this is going to be time reporting through a fire hose. So if you have any questions at all during the webinar, please don't hesitate to chat them into the question bar. OnCorps is a somewhat clunky system, but we're stuck with it. So we'll try our best to really explain all the different intricacies of how the online platform works, but definitely don't hesitate to shoot a question our way during the webinar so that we can walk you through these different pieces. So to start, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the different types of hours that fellows will be reporting. So you are responsible for approving all the fellow time cards for your two fellows every other week. So we do submit to our accounting team every other week for time cards. So it will be your job to go into OnCorps, since you are the one who's going to know most centrally what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to show you what this online platform looks like from your perspective. So I'm just going to log into the supervisor. So when you get into OnCorps and you log in using your username and password, this is what you're going to see. So you've fewer different pieces than the program directors will see. So it's a slightly less overwhelming system. And when you're approving your hours, you're going to go into time tracking, member service hours, and approve member timesheets. And you're going to be able to approve time cards either by a time period. So these are, every single week of the service year will show up on here, or by your individual members. So right now, we're looking at one of our site supervisors in the Bay Area. So just your 2 fellows that you are supervising are going to appear here. And then you'll be able to actually click on and see their different time cards for that time period. So just to show you what the different time cards look like, I'll go in and then we'll go back and I'll actually talk a little bit more about what the different categories are. So when you are approving a member time card, this is what's going to come up. So there are a lot of different pieces on here, and then I'm going to walk through them quickly, and then we're going to talk in more detail about what they all mean. So on the left-hand side, you'll have the daily total of your fellows. So at a high level, just check here to see if you feel like that's accurate based on what they've done on a day-to-day basis. And then the fellows will have to time in and time out for every different activity that they do throughout the day. So important thing to note when you look at all these time cards, the fellows all need to check out for lunch. And there is a certification at the bottom. I certify that these hours do not include any lunch breaks. So make sure that your fellows are taking a lunch break throughout the day. It is required by AmeriCorps that all members take at least a half-hour lunch break. And when you are approving time cards, that's one of the big things to look out for, is just making sure that the fellows have actually checked out for that lunch break throughout the day. So then the next column to your right is category, and that will be service, training, prep, or volunteer. And I believe Emily has shared an hours cheat sheet with you all, which we're going to be talking through in much greater detail in a minute. Then the next column is their project. So the fellows will be able to preload OnCorps with the projects that they're going to be working on throughout the year. So they will actually, be able to log to exactly your project, and there are different project elements. Those will appear here as well. And then to the right is description or activity. So they are required to include a description for every activity that they do. On California Volunteers is the state agency which administers AmeriCorps, and they do check member time cards. And if they see that there are consistently no descriptions or activities listed, they will bump the time cards back and have the fellow go through and recomplete all their time cards for the year. So really important that we're getting those description and activities listed from the start. So this is, I see a question coming through. So this is the time card high level pieces. And again, if you have any questions about the specific aspects of the time card, please let me know. But before we go into the time card approval process and what that looks like to approve the time cards, now that you've seen what it looks like, I want to go into the different hours categories a little bit more. So I'm just going to switch views. All right, so now you should all be viewing the CivicSpark hours key. So the 2 main categories, as I mentioned, are service hours and training hours. So the distinction between the 2 is we try to make it as clear as possible with this hour sheet, but there are going to be plenty of opportunities for clarification. So if you are ever not sure of what category hours should be in, please let us know. How I tend to think of service and training is service is anything that is related to the fellows project, whether that be time cards, administrative work that goes towards the project, the actual doing of the project itself, any trainings that relate directly to the project, anything that really propels the work of that project forward, or anything that's necessary to happen in order to move that project forward falls under service. Training, on the other hand, is anything that relates to the professional development of the fellow that does not directly relate to the project. So those are the CivicSpark trainings that we run on our end, the orientation, the mid-year retreat, any other trainings that the fellow goes to. So those are the two kind of main categories. And as you saw on OnCorps, the different categories that you have shown there are primarily service or training. So now diving into service a little bit more. So there are a couple of different subcategories within service that the fellows will be reporting their hours to. So prep, service, and service volunteer. So we'll get to volunteer hours in a little bit because that's an additional kind of piece of complication. But keeping it simple, prep is the first hours category within service that fellows are going to be logging to. A lot of work that they do during the first 2 weeks will fall into the prep category. So setting up their office space, applying for food stamps, doing the site orientation with you, and reviewing any other materials that they have to really get going. So that prep category only can be used within the first 2 weeks. And then after that, you really won't be approving it at all. You definitely shouldn't be. And the one really key thing to note is that for all of the different hours that these fellows are logging, whether they be prep, service, volunteer, they do need to be coded to a specific project. So as you see here, we have number specific project code. Every fellow and every project will be assigned a particular numbers code, and that's what they're logging their hours to. So that's the prep category, but again, those project codes relate to anything that they are doing throughout the service year. So after the 2 week mark has passed, prep is no longer on their time card. The next big category of hours that you're going to start seeing is service. Again, obviously, service hours will be logged to a particular project code. And this is going to be the vast majority of the hours that the fellows are logging on a regular and ongoing basis. So as I mentioned, those service hours are general project or service work, meeting with you as the site supervisor, any writing or research that goes into the project work, any trainings related to the project, and then again, any CivicSpark related admin that has to happen in order for the project to move forward. So time cards, the reports that they do on our end, so their monthly progress reports, great stories, anything that is general project admin does go into the typical service hour category. So as you know, fellows need to log 1,700 hours throughout the course of the year. When we are trying to meet the 1,350 hours that the fellows will be working directly on your project throughout the year, this category of service is what we're looking at. So prep does not go into that. Volunteer hours don't go into that. It is that service category that we're calculating to make sure that the fellows are getting to 1,350 hours, which is why it's really important that they're logging to the correct project code so that we actually are able to calculate and calculate those numbers. So then touching on the other types of service work, so we do have some other service activities, so again, not to your specific project, and those are the typical activities of an AmeriCorps member. So different service days that they'll be doing. So even though they will not be doing these activities with you, want to make sure that those are captured on the time card, and you will know that they're doing these service days. So when you do see that AA other service project pop up, you know what that goes for. So again, I'm going to skip over the volunteer category for a second, and we'll come back to that. So then skipping down to training, there are a couple of other training categories to calculate. So the first is CivicSpark training. So that's the vast majority of training hours will be in this AA CivicSpark training project. And the things that go into that, is it says RC, but it actually should say a project associate. So any meetings that happen with Emily, one-on-one with the fellows, that will go into that CivicSpark training category. That's seen as general professional development, getting them on track for their project work, and projecting them forward throughout the service year. The next, statewide webinars and other monthly trainings that we organize will be in CivicSpark training. So again, CivicSpark training, things that we are organizing on our end. So any trainings that are you put on directly related to the project, that would go under service, but those other or other training activities that the fellows will be getting pulled away for will go under CivicSpark training. And then the next category of training is other training. So this is a bit of an exception to the other hours categories. All the fellows will have 24 hours to spend on outside or third-party trainings that aren't directly related to their project or to CivicSpark in general, but relate more to their professional development goals. So for example, if there's a training or a conference that they'd really like to go to, and they get that approved by both you as a project partner and by the project associate Emily, they can attend that training, but it'll have to be logged as AA other training hours. So if you ever see that other training category pop up on the time card, but you know you didn't approve that time off for the fellow, definitely let us know, and you'll have to bump that time card back to the fellow so that they can update that. But again, other training hours not put on by CivicSpark or the local government commission or by you as a project partner, but rather general professional development opportunities that the fellows will take advantage of throughout the year. And we don't track that time for the fellows. The fellows will need to keep track of that themselves to make sure that they're not going over that. It is up to them to use it or not, but we do see a lot of fellows really taking advantage of that professional development opportunity. So before we go into the volunteer hours, I do want to take a quick pause to see if anybody has any questions on any of these other time card categories that we've just talked about. And you can also use the raised hand function if you'd prefer to actually speak your question rather than type it in the chat bar. No? So we got a question, is it okay if prep is a full 80 hours? Yes, that's definitely okay. It's possible that it'll be less than 80 hours, but it shouldn't be more than that. So if you're aiming for 80 hours for prep, that's great. Will the fellows be able to understand this and be able to help? So we will go into depth and have a much longer training with the fellows about these time card categories, but it really is up to the site supervisors to be enforcing and really checking up on this. So we want to make sure that you know as much as possible about these time cards since you'll be the ones approving them. Emily will once a month go back and look at the time cards, but it's up to the site supervisors to really enforce the different rules here and make sure that fellows are filling out their time cards correctly. So if any of this is not clear, definitely reach out to us because the fellows we'll talk about in a couple of minutes some of the most commonly made mistakes, but there are certainly a lot of mistakes that fellows make when they're reporting their hours. So want to make sure that you understand this as best as possible. And another piece of clarification, where we should be logging one-on-one check-ins with site supervisors. So that should be going under service. So as you see, the first sub-point under general project work is meeting with the site supervisor. So any one-on-one project-related check-ins that you're having with your fellow, want to make sure that that's being logged to service. So we will, another question is whether or not these cheat sheets we passed along. So yes, we'll definitely be passing these along to you all. And again, we will do all that we can to make sure that the fellows really understand this. I think we see the most issues come about in the first month or two when fellows are figuring it out. Some fellows have never filled out a time card before starting CivicSpark. So some things that we take for granted as kind of common information might be lost on the fellows. So there is definitely some hand-holding that needs to happen in the first week. And we will completely go through this time card process with them and the hours cheat sheet with them in great detail during orientation and during the first weeks of the program. And we'll share all that information with you as well. And are there any other questions that folks have now? Please just continue to type them into the question bar on the side. So the last piece that I'll talk about briefly is the volunteer hours, so volunteer S and volunteer T. So this is a slightly tricky piece because you won't be working directly with the fellows necessarily on their 100 hours of volunteer work. But we'll talk about what the volunteer S and volunteer T means. So when the fellows are logging their hours to volunteer, this is only the time that they're working directly on their 100 hours of volunteer engagement work. So volunteer work that is directly for the project does not go into this topic. This is only for that set aside volunteer engagement project that the fellow is developing. And the volunteer S&T at a high level is the beginning of the year when the fellows are just getting their feet on the ground and starting to work on the volunteer project. They will be logging their hours to volunteer T. That is really the kind of first initial stages of the volunteer project. So really the researching, the brainstorming, the basic outreach, any time before they've actually picked their volunteer engagement project and started rolling with it, will be logged to volunteer T as the category with AA volunteer project development as the project on their time card. And then once they've actually selected their volunteer engagement project and have done all the necessary background research and are ready to start implementing it, then they'll switch to logging their hours to volunteer S, meaning service, with the project being AA volunteer engagement project, because they're no longer developing it, they're actually implementing it. So all the actions that fall under that category, the outreach and recruitment and direct support of their volunteers, any engagement with their team members, and actually doing the volunteer event itself will all be under volunteer S. So again, the initial brainstorming phase, any time before they've actually selected their volunteer project, goes under volunteer T. And once that volunteer project has been selected, they will begin logging all their hours under volunteer to volunteer S. So this is at a high level, all the different hours that the fellows will be logging. There are many different, obviously, options under these categories, and you will, in the first couple of weeks at least, see things that might be new to you. But as always, be sure to just ask if you have any questions at all about where a particular category of hours falls. So before continuing on with the timesheet process, I want to talk through a couple of commonly made mistakes just so that you start to get familiar with how we log hours and where you might be able to step in and make some corrections. So the first piece is the project, as I mentioned before. Sometimes fellows they log to the correct category, and I'm just going to quickly show you again where these two pieces fall on OnCorps. So on OnCorps here, we have our category, and then we have our project over on this side. So a lot of the times fellows know between service and training where hours should be, but often at the beginning of the year at least, we saw that there were some issues about the projects that were noted. So for example, going back to this list, fellows will log their hours to prep, but then wouldn't be particularly familiar with their project and would log to other service because they didn't quite see how it related directly to their project. So making sure when you're checking and approving time cards that things align with the subcategory and project code as they're found here in rows. So that's one of the major issues that we came across last year, is that fellows just weren't aligning their project code with the particular subcategory that it related to. Another commonly made mistake was that fellows were logging project-related training to CivicSpark training. So for example, if they got on site with you and you sent them to sorry about that, and you sent them to a training because it was going to help them with their project work, sometimes fellows would log that to CivicSpark training, but we want to make sure that that is logged to their service project since that's required and necessary for them to actually complete the work that you're setting out for them. So that's another commonly made mistake. Another mistake that was pretty common was logging, miscalculating the projects on volunteer S and volunteer T. So again, whenever you see your fellow logging any hours to volunteer S or volunteer T, making sure that the project here aligns with the subcategory. So for example, the fellow should never be logging AA volunteer engagement project, the project code for volunteer S to volunteer T and vice versa. So again, just making sure that when you're approving time cards, have this hours cheat sheet handy and make sure that things are just lining up correctly. And then another note on projects is that these projects here want to make sure that they are aligning with the particular beneficiary, which is something that we will show the fellows, and shouldn't have too many issues with that at all. But if you do have two beneficiaries, they will be noted in different project codes. So there's not too much for you to be keeping track of there. We will be communicating that with the fellows in great detail, but really just looking at those project codes and making sure that it's your project. The fellows should really never be logging hours to another project. So again, I'm going to take a quick pause before we go through the actual time card approval process to see if there are any more questions. So a question that came through is, what if a fellow has a particular activity that doesn't relate to a particular beneficiary necessarily? So time cards, for example, the fellows do need to report on their time card when they're doing some of those administrative pieces. So in general, the rule that we say is that any admin time should be split amongst the beneficiaries. So if a fellow 1 week wants to put one beneficiary down when they're logging their hours for time tracking and other admin, the next week they should put their other beneficiary down. We want to spread that hours out. So if you're ever curious how the fellow is progressing towards getting their hours on a beneficiary, definitely let us know. And that's why we're really hounding to make sure that those beneficiary hours are captured, because we do track how many hours are logged to any particular beneficiary on any given week or month. Great. So again, if you have any other questions, please keep them coming. So another question that came through is about the 8 hours of training per month that you all will be doing with your fellow. So as I mentioned before on the hours cheat sheet, one-on-one check-ins with you and your fellow will be logged as service hours by the fellow. That's not to say, though, that those check-ins do not count towards your 8 hours of training activities. So that almost can be in the category of project-related training for the fellow. So make sure that those one-on-one trainings are being, those one-on-one meetings and project check-ins are being logged to service. But if you are doing other trainings, professional development trainings with the fellow as part of those 8 hours, that will be logged to CivicSpark service, or CivicSpark training, sorry. Great. So now we'll move on to the time card approval process and review process. So to start, I showed you how to get to the time cards for your fellows. So again, time tracking, member service hours, approved member timesheets. And from there, you'll be able to see any time card that needs your approval. So again, once you click on a timesheet and it pulls up here, you're going to want to do your review of a quick review at least of every line just to make sure that it's logged to the correct category, the correct project, and the description is complete on the right-hand side. And then also, as I mentioned, wanting to make sure that the fellow is logging out for lunch. So say you go through this process and everything looks good to you and you want to approve the time card. You'll go down to the bottom, you'll check the I certify that these hours do not include any lunch or breaks. You'll click I have reviewed and approved this timesheet, and then you click submit. So if you're approving the timesheet, there's no need to put anything in this comment section, and the fellow won't be notified that you approved their time card. But say you do this review and you find that there's a issue, that maybe the fellow didn't log out for lunch, or that you know that they took a break but they didn't note it on the time card, you will click the I have reviewed and do not approve this timesheet. In the comment section, you need to say why you are turning or rejecting the time card. And when you do reject the time card, the fellow will get an email notifying them that their time card has been rejected. And at that point, they can go back into OnCorps and resubmit the time card for approval. So that's just one thing to keep track of. Make sure when you are rejecting time cards, you are including as detailed comments as possible in the comment section down here so that the fellow can easily go back in and reapprove. And then a question that's coming through. One of the questions that just came through is regarding the trainings, training topics that'll be happening every month, and whether a schedule will go out to all the site supervisors. So I'll actually let Emily answer that question.
Yeah, great question. So we touched on this during our site supervisor orientation, but there will be a state seminar that will be held by LGC staff, by myself, or by Danielle Dolan, our water program manager, and that will be the first week each month. Those will have separate topics that are content specific. So water energy nexus, water land use planning, environmental justice, climate change and public health. There will also be local trainings, and those will be led by the site supervisors. And those will be more soft skills training on project management, resume building. There also is some space in those local trainings that we left open for project partners to determine their own topics. So I believe there's 3 months throughout the service year that we leave open for site supervisors to direct their own topics. We are finalizing that schedule this week, and I will have that to you with a list of other documents by the end of this week. So keep your eye out for those documents so that you can start to identify what trainings you'll be providing and what trainings we'll be providing. Just another note on those local trainings, that those soft skills trainings that you'll be leading, we develop the majority of the curriculum for those trainings. So prior to the month's trainings, we'll send you the activities, the outline, and so all you'll have to do is facilitate that training with both of your fellows in that. And we've touched on this before, but if you have 2 site supervisors at your project or your organization, excuse me, you can have one person facilitate the training for both fellows each month, and that can alternate from month to month. But we will be sending you that schedule and list of topics by the end of this week.
And we'll also follow up with that cheat sheet again so that you have it on record. Great. So in terms of approving the time cards, we want to make sure that they're completed by our deadline for our accounting team. And to help you get those in on time, we will be sending bi-weekly reminders. So you don't need to keep track of what our payroll schedule is or anything like that. We will be making sure that you are keyed into when everything is due. So Ariadna Hernandez is the project coordinator for CivicSpark, or one of the 2 project coordinators, and she sends out those bi-weekly reminders. So when you do get that email from Ariadna, be sure to go on and approve those hours on OnCorps. And then there are also ways in OnCorps to set up your own, your own email reminders when you get fellow time cards submitted. So we'll send you instructions on how to actually set up those email reminders. And that way, when one of your fellows does submit their time card, you'll get a note just telling you that it's in OnCorps waiting for your approval. And that way you don't necessarily need to wait and approve all 4 of your fellow time cards on that day before accounting is due. So those are the major pieces of time reporting. Again, we'll share all this information along with some additional instructions after the webinar. And if you have any questions that do come up about time categories, if you're just confused about how the whole process works, please let us know. And one of the things that we can't get rid of in OnCorps is there are 2 options you'll see under time tracking: member service hours and supervisor in-kind hours. You do not need to report your hours on OnCorps. You only need to approve the member hours here. So on our end for the supervisor stipend, we will need you to submit an invoice just saying what you did and how you use those 8 hours a month. And that's something that we'll be sending more information out about, and you'll be receiving information on those invoices from Jamie Cha, who's our staff accountant. But you do not need to worry about logging any of your hours under the supervisor tab on time tracking. So that for now covers everything for member time tracking. There are a couple of other things in OnCorps that we're going to walk through quickly that relate to different responsibilities that you have. The first is fellow performance assessments. So during the site supervisor orientation, Emily talked with you about filling out fall performance assessments and end of year performance assessments with your fellows. So these are a really important part of our year in terms of developing our professional development trainings and making sure that the fellows' professional goals are met throughout the year. And as site supervisors, you'll play a pretty big role in that process. So just want to show you where you will be logging your professional assessments of your fellows. So under reporting custom reports, submit custom reports, you click on that tab. And if you are interested in following along with any of this as well, you can log into OnCorps. So ca.oncorreports.com, and you can actually play around with some of these pieces in your own portal. But again, reporting custom reports, submit custom reports, you'll see that there are 2 options that come up. The first is the end of year performance assessment. It will say site supervisor on yours, not RC. In fall performance assessment. Right now, since the year has click on select just so you can see. So once you select the form, so the fall performance forms will be due in December of this year, and we'll again be sending you prompts when you have to fill that out. But you'll have to submit one for each one of your fellows. So these are several of the Bay Area fellows. Just your 2 fellows will pop up. So just to give you an example, I will pull up Amory's. So this is the form that you'll see for your fellows, and you will type in the fellow's name, and then you're going to rank them on a number of different categories. And again, we make sure that this is done a little bit into the service year so that you know the fellow a little bit and kind of give them a baseline ranking of where they're at professionally in a bunch of different categories. And when you're filling this out, a lot of the fellows are spectacular, and we want to give them all 5s because they're great. But think about it in terms of areas for growth and professional development. We don't want to be giving fellows 5s across the board because we are dedicated to building them professionally throughout the year. So be honest and be open with your different assignments of numbers. And the fellow, again, won't be prompted that you filled this out. I think a lot of site supervisors last year had discussions with their fellows after the fact to talk about how they were ranked in different categories. And you will be able to see the fall assessments that your fellows have completed, but they will not see this form. But you can definitely, and we encourage you to have a conversation with them about what you filled out and where you see needs for improvement. So in these 2 long questions down here, what skills were identified that are of benefit and will be developed during the year? So you want to make sure, again, this is where that conversation comes in. Based on what you know about the fellows so far and based on what they would like to see accomplished during the year, identify some key skills that you want to help them develop and that the program should help them develop throughout the year. Some site supervisors do short answers. Some actually write very long professional development plans for their fellows. So completely up to you how detailed you want to go in on these different assessments, but the more detail you can provide, the better. And then related to these development needs, please list specific goals. So again, after that conversation with your fellow, think about what you want them to be achieving throughout the year and what are some of the things that they're really looking for. And from there, the final plan is to develop an action plan to address those skills and goals. And this is a place where a lot of site supervisors started to think about what they wanted to do with some of those training hours. So if you see that both of your fellows have a really strong need for project management, site supervisors last year did a project management training or walked them through the skills necessary to be effective project managers. So use this as a tool to start outlining those professional development trainings for the fellows and really go into as much detail as you're able to when you're filling out these assessments. So again, you'll fill out one of these for both of your fellows or however many fellows you happen to be supervising at the beginning of the year. And then when it is time to, at the end of the year, sorry about that, to submit your fall end of year assessment, you can also do that on OnCorps under the reporting, custom reports, submit custom reports tab. So it's I won't click onto that because it's almost an identical form, but it just talks about their progress, the fellow's progress on those goals throughout the year and some of your key takeaways as a site supervisor. So these are the 2 main forms that you'll be filling out. And then as I mentioned, you can also see the forms that fellows have submitted. So I'll show you where to find those. So under reporting, custom reports, view custom reports, you'll be able to see the fall performance assessments that fellows have submitted here, their gap assessments, which you talked about again during the site supervisor orientation, and the progress reports that the fellows fill out on a monthly basis. So this is going to be your go-to place for accessing these forms. The gap assessment in particular is a really big one. When the fellows submit their gap assessments, and unfortunately, since they've all been approved now, there's not too much for you to be able to see at this point. But you will be approving the gap assessments, and you'll be able to view them and see what the fellows are actually submitted. So as I mentioned, the OnCorps interface can sometimes be a little tough to work through. So when you want to view a custom report, it's going to bring up this form, which looks like a submission form, which is, again, not particularly intuitive. But this is pretty much a very complicated search bar. You can search by fellow, and then it'll pull up a separate window with that fellow's progress reports for the year. So again, it's not a particularly pretty field to look at, but when you are curious, you want to know how things have been going with your fellow, you can access those progress reports here and see what your fellow has been typing in. What are the things that they need help with? What are the things they have questions with? Are there any resources that they need? These are all things that the fellows can be logging in these progress reports. And this year, we've also updated these progress reports to include impact numbers as well as great stories. So this kind of progress report field is going to be your one-stop shop for all of the monthly reporting for your fellows. So then the last piece, we talked about where to find time reporting. We've talked about where you report your fall and end of year performance assessments, where you can access those performance assessments for your fellow, where to find the custom reports and the progress reports for your fellow. The last piece that we're going to talk about just very briefly are volunteer logs. I say very briefly because, again, the volunteer piece is not something that you're going to be doing a lot of as the site supervisor. That's really going to be on us to implement and track that. But I do want you to be able to see where that volunteer info is logged. So under reporting, view reports, you'll see volunteer mobilization is one of the main pieces. So when you click on that, what's going to come up are any volunteer logs that your fellows have reported throughout the year. So again, there's no way for you to approve these or edit them, reject them, but it's just an easy place to say, hey, I'm really curious to see what my fellow's been doing in volunteer engagement. You pull up these reports, and all of the volunteer information will be listed here. So the number of volunteers they've recruited, the number of hours those volunteers have served. So just as it's an FYI, I think if you do know that your fellow's been doing this work and you happen to take a look and say, hey, that doesn't quite look right, definitely let us know. But this is more just a resource and a tool for you to look at if you are working on that volunteer engagement piece with your fellow and are curious what they've been reporting to the program. So again, just really quickly, I'm going to go through where to find everything. So when you want to approve time cards, you'll go to time tracking, member service hours, approve member timesheets, and that's going to be there. To submit your performance assessments, you're going to reporting, custom reports, submit custom reports, and from there you can submit those fall and end of year performance assessments. And if you want to see the reports that your fellows have submitted, you'll go to reporting, custom reports, view custom reports. And then if you would like to see the volunteer mobilization logs the fellows filled out, you will find that under reporting, view reports, volunteer mobilization. So that's a really speedy, high-level view of everything that you're going to have to be doing in OnCorps throughout the year. I've been working in OnCorps for 3 service years now, and I know that it's clunky, so do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions at all. We can certainly find some time to walk you through things if you're getting held up on any of these pieces. We really don't want them to delay you or suck up your time, so definitely ask us if you're having some trouble rather than clunking through and trying to figure it out yourself. I think that's pretty much it, but I do want to pause and see if there are any other questions. If there are any other questions, we do want to take a pause and see what you can do to help, see what we can do to help. Okay, well, we're not seeing many questions come through. I know that this is kind of reporting through a fire hose. I think it's a lot of information at once, and we hope it's not too overwhelming, but I know it definitely is a lot to digest. I think just in the first couple of weeks, as you figure out OnCorps and how to approve hours, that's really where the most of this time is going to be. I think we definitely see site supervisors get the hang of it pretty quickly, and then it's hopefully, just a couple of minutes every 2 weeks coming in, checking time cards, approving them, and then being good to go. So I think a lot of the learning curve is definitely now. So we'll share this hours cheat sheet with you, as well as some other helpful tips on navigating OnCorps. And if you have any other questions that do come about as a result of that, don't hesitate to reach out. Emily and I, again, are more than happy to help you in any way we can. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. Really excited to get started and get the fellows on board in just a couple of weeks. And we'll be in touch with more information soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.